My name is John Silvester. I'm Australia's longest serving crime reporter and write a weekly column for The Age. Many of my colleagues have wondered why I've never bothered to move to other areas of the paper. The reason's pretty simple. I've got the best job in journalism, playing cops and robbers and getting paid for it. Over more than 40 years I've covered some of Australia's biggest crimes and met fascinating characters on both sides of the law. In this series, you'll hear from them, the cops and the crooks, telling their stories. Welcome to my world. Welcome to Naked City.
Detective Mick Drury had been washing up in the kitchen of his Chatswood home when the gunman fired through the window. Mick Drury had been shot twice at close range, through the chest and stomach.
Mick Drury was young, smart, ambitious and a gifted New South Wales undercover operative.
Police today were anxious not to say too much about Mick Drury's career, but did admit he had worked as an undercover policeman with the drug squad.
The drug problem had been recognised in New South Wales and more resources were devoted to enforcing drug laws than in Victoria. The drug squad in Sydney considered itself the best.
That as an undercover agent, he was working on an interstate drug case.
He was going to buy $110,000 of heroin in a sting operation. But in a last-minute hitch, the crooks demanded the deal be done in Melbourne. And the deal was set for the Old Melbourne Hotel in North Melbourne in March 1982. With a little luck, police would get the Sydney connection, Jack Richardson, the distributor, Brian Hansen, and the major supplier, Alan Williams, in this one operation.
This has convinced his fellow officers he was shot by a hitman after getting too close to a narcotics boss in an investigation.
That narcotics boss was a crook named Alan Williams. Williams was a giant in the heroin business who routinely did $500,000 deals. That was at a time when that sort of money could buy you 2 suburban houses. He was an interesting guy. He went to private school and was a handy footballer who probably could have made it to the top league if he wasn't an habitual crook. Years later, I wrote a story on Williams that pissed him off. He'd just been released from prison and he made contact and wanted to talk. Over a few days, I interviewed him. Alan had no problem telling me he was a serious drug dealer, making serious money.
What are you looking at? I mean, what are you sort of moving a week?
Early doors I wasn't moving that much. I was only 500 grand a week.
Good money at the time.
Oh yeah.
80 to 82 would be the big time.
Oh yeah, that was actually flying times. That was flying times.
What we're looking at there, what sort of...
Millions. You can't put that down, see, because I said in court under oath that I earned 450,000 or something.
All up,
yeah. And I was the type of person that couldn't work for another boss, so I had to be my own boss. So you slowly worm your way in, and you start cutting out the middlemen all the time. And next thing you know, you're dealing direct with the manufacturers and the drug couriers.
So you're moving a hell of a lot of gear around the place. So you understood that you had a potential buyer from Sydney, and then of course we come to the Old Melbourne. You didn't know Drury.
To cut a long story short, he went upstairs, come back down with the bloke, this is Drury. He introduced him, shook hands with him, got back in the car and said jump in the car.
Drury didn't want to get into the car with Williams because he needed to be visible to the backup team so he could give the sign that the deal was done.
Well, he didn't want to get in the car, Drury. I said, listen, you either want to do the business or you don't want to do the business. I said, I haven't seen your money. And he said, well, I haven't seen the gear. I said, well, here's the fucking gear. Pulled it out and showed him the gear.
Then Williams' instincts kicked in. Things weren't quite right.
Next thing you know, I took the gear off him. I said, look, don't worry about the fucking deal, mate. I pulled the gear off him, put it down between my legs. I said, the deal's off, forget it.
So Williams called the deal off as police swooped in to make the arrest. But they were travelling too fast and slid by, leaving a gap for Williams to floor it and escape.
The coppers can't make it that hard to lock me in. They overshot the mark, skidded straight past me. I immediately put it in the fucking gear and off I went. And got away.
Williams ran through Melbourne University, dumped the heroin, and then police lost him.
No one could follow me into Melbourne University. I knew it like the back of my hand. I could leave the telegrams there when I was a kid.
Williams was eventually caught and charged for the bus gone wrong, and he was facing at least 10 years jail. But the case rested on the evidence of the undercover cop Mick Drury. If he could get to him, Williams could stay out of jail and stay in business. He approached a friend and hitman Christopher Dale Flannery to broker the deal.
Well, I knew Chris in Sydney and I knew he had Jackson inside because he told me previous. And any time I needed any help from him, just get in touch with him.
He knew Flannery had big connections with bent cops in Sydney.
He said he had a couple of Jackson Sydney sweep and they were trustworthy and had known him for a long time. Happened to mention to him that I was pinched by an undercover couple from Sydney. And could anything be done regarding getting him to change his evidence or slow it down?
Money was no object. When he started as a hitman, Chris Flannery charged $10,000 for a bashing and $50,000 for a murder. But as his reputation grew, so did his fees, eventually charging $100,000. And he didn't care who he killed as long as he was paid for it. Pretty quickly, Flannery realised if he was going to work in the hitman business, he'd need the backup of corrupt cops. And there was no more corrupt policeman than Roger Rogerson. Soon, they became deadly associates. The notorious New South Wales detective Roger Rogerson. It was a time in New South Wales when corruption was king, and bent detective Roger Rogerson appeared to be untouchable. Rogerson was tough, brave and charismatic. He was also as bent as a boomerang. I didn't like Roger and he didn't like me. He didn't like me because I thought he was a crook. I didn't like him because he was one. He once said I would get into his face trying to see what made him tick. What I saw was a soul as black as a dog's guts. In an interview with 60 Minutes, Drury reflects on the difference between a good cop and one that's gone bad.
I think it's fair to say former police officer Roger Rogerson is an evil man. Publicly, he was a highly decorated star of the New South Wales Police Force, a man many viewed as a potential police commissioner. But that was all a lie. In reality, he was a bad cop, as crooked as can be. Tonight, a former good cop, Mick Drury, is speaking for the first time about Rogerson's involvement in the attempt to kill him.
Well, as a result of my investigation, Alan Williams was charged in Melbourne with some very serious heroin charges. Very serious indeed. My intentions were not to buy, but in actual fact to arrest them, which the Victorian Police in due course did.
Roger didn't know Mick, but he was confident enough to ring him and tell Drury to come and meet him at his office.
If Roger Rogerson wanted to see a young police officer like myself, you didn't ignore that request to go and speak to him. I walked straight in, stood at the other side of the desk. He was sitting down doing his paperwork, and I said to him that he wanted to see me. What was it all about with the Melbourne case? And we started to talk. He said to me that he'd received word from the Melbourne case there was an opportunity there for me to receive $15,000 to $25,000 if I altered my evidence.
It speaks volumes about the state of play at the time that Rogerson could calmly ask a police officer to cop a bribe inside a police station without fearing it would be reported. But in his meeting with Rogerson, Drury flatly refused the bribe. He was giving evidence against Williams no matter what.
I took a position on that straight away. And I said to him, I can't discuss it. I will have to go to Melbourne and give my evidence as it is, and nothing can be done. And that's my attitude, and I walked out. It was a big meeting. I knew what I was going to do in that meeting. I was not going to change my position. Otherwise, my entire career would have been a joke, and I couldn't have lived with that. The whole thing would have been a joke. if I had have acquiesced to his intentions. It was a tough meeting, but I can assure you I was trained for those tough moments.
Drury stood firm, and even crook Alan Williams respected the cop who couldn't be bought.
Mick Drury said it as it was. It was the only bloke that stuck to his guns. Drury. He was unshaken.
Drury knocked back the approach, but he didn't report it. So hitman Chris Flannery and Roger the Dodger met Williams at a Sydney restaurant after Drury refused the bribe. Out of the blue, Flannery says, "Well, if it was me, I'd put him off," meaning to kill him.
It's Chris who said it.
Yeah, if it was me, he said I'd put him off.
When he said I'd put him off, you said something like,
It's a big step.
big step. So it wasn't even your friggin' idea.
That's right.
Roger was present during these discussions, and the deal was going to be 50 up front, 50 on delivery.
Yeah, I got 52.
It must have been a weird feeling to be sitting there with a bloke you know as a cop.
It was a weird situation, and I said to Chris, I said, geez, you must have a lot of faith in this fucking bloke talking like this in front of a fucking copper. When he says, listen, he said, don't worry about him. He said, I'll make sure he's fucking there.
So the hit on Drury went ahead. Was Roger there? We'll never know.
The detective, a senior constable, had been standing at the kitchen sink of his Chatswood home shortly after 6 o'clock this evening when 2 shots were fired through the window. He was rushed to the Royal North Shore Hospital in a critical condition with gunshot wounds to the chest and stomach.
Against all odds, Mick survived. Flannery may have been a stone killer, but to him, a deal was a deal. He was paid 50 grand up front to kill Drury, but waived the second payment of 50 when the target lived. I suggested to Williams that Flannery, known as Rent-A-Kill, wasn't a nice bloke.
You reckon he was a nice bloke, but a lot of us are saying something different.
He was a nice bloke. He was a fucking thorough gentleman. But he was also a murderer. A paid killer.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And remember to rate and comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Unless, of course, you don't like it, then shut up. Believing he would die, Mick Drury made a deathbed statement implicating Rogerson and saying the Dodger offered him money to change his evidence against Alan Williams. Mick would eventually recover, while Rogerson went into slow decline. From that point on, it would pit Drury against Rogerson. When this whole sordid mess ended up in court, it was the word of a good cop against a bad one. And the wild card was Alan Williams.
Roger Rogerson was in full view of the cameras on arrival at court today. Drury appeared to have made a good recovery from gunshot wounds he received. He claims that at Darlinghurst Police Station in September 1983, Roger Rogerson made him an offer in these terms. They're prepared to pay $15,000 to $25,000 for Williams to get off.
He offered Drury no more than 25 grand to throw the trial, but Williams had offered more than 5 times that, which shows Rogerson was not only bent, he was cheap too.
Yeah, but when figures were being discussed, they were with Chris and later on they were with Chris and Roger. I offered 30 grand at one stage, 50 grand at another stage, 100 grand at another stage, and even an open ticket.
Rogerson admits speaking to Drury, but he denies attempting to bribe him. Under intense cross-examination late today, Drury appeared to be under enormous stress. At one point, he seemed to be on the verge of breaking down. He was asked whether he wanted to take a break, but he decided to press on. Drury will be back in the witness box tomorrow.
Williams was a good crook, but he was using his own product.
And then he all started smoking.
I started smoking, yeah. Smoking and then up the Snozzer and then up the Warwick Farm.
Williams was an old school crook. He loved to use rhyming slang. He refers to the racecourse Warwick Farm. What he really means is he was shoving heroin up his own arm. Perhaps this is why he was stupid enough to try and kill the undercover cop.
John, the bottom line is, mate, I didn't have the full functional faculties at the time of this deal going down. All right. I truly believe, without doubt, if I had been functioning on all four cylinders, mentally and physically, it would never have taken place.
It would bring his illegal drug empire crashing around his ears.
Basically, did not realise the repercussions that this would cause.
He had to realise that no matter how big he was, there's a line you just don't cross.
You crossed the line, then no one crosses that line.
Well, that's right. That was the bottom line. The bottom line was there was always an understanding between criminals and police. You don't step over the line. You know, if you're a bank copper, you cop the money and you let the crook go. You don't cop the money and then pinch him.
And would make him a target of the good cops and the bad ones.
Christ knows what. As I started to fucking become a giant and get invincible and fucking thought I was fucking unpinchable.
That was the problem, wasn't it?
Of course it was.
That's what you said. That's what I was missing. See, in my head, there was a piece missing. You know, I couldn't work out, no matter how much junk you were on, how a bloke, obviously as bright as you, would do what you did. I couldn't see the missing piece, and that's it. That you thought you were fucking invincible.
Yeah, you do.
The question I wanted to ask Alan is why would someone making so much money, who knew the system, do something as stupid as to try and kill someone like Drury? He had to realise everything would collapse.
John, I am no fool. I am an intelligent, well brought up. I went to the best schools. My mother worked her ass off to put me through school. She washed dishes at 15 years. I class myself as being an average everyday citizen that's worldly. And, you know, and I read the papers, I read about politics, I read about football, I read about the crime. You know, I could read The Age and absorb The Age. Whereas today's students...
Melbourne cop Brian Murphy knew Williams well. We're sitting in a workshop where Brian makes toys and things for his grandkids. How lovely.
Turn that off?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. Controversial Melbourne detective Brian Murphy was not involved in the old Melbourne sting, but he had a long relationship with Williams. This would eventually draw him into the Drury story, although the two had not even met. Brian is a walking contradiction, a religious man who swears like a trooper and a teetotaler who prowled through pubs to meet gangsters. We can normally find him in the workshop at the back of his Bayside home.
What one? It's no good at giving them something.
I don't
You
want
feel that?
That's beautiful.
That's going to come up even better.
A warning though. Many years ago when Brian smelt cigarette smoke from his neighbour's drive, he popped his head over the fence to see some turkey trying to steal a mower. When Brian politely inquired what he was doing, the thief told him to piss off and mind his own business. Brian then shot him in the foot, which proves two things. Always be polite to your elders and don't annoy Brian Francis Murphy.
If you hold that sort of...
Yeah, hang on, I'll come a bit closer. Williams was pretty sweet with me, he thought. He used to have to report on bail at Russell Street. The senior sergeants would say, you fucking dog. And every time I was on, I just treated him okay. He always referred to me as Mr. Murphy, and I was as sweet as a nut with him. And he was sweetening me up for his future activities and getting on my good side. And I didn't mind that, because that's my job. It's a policeman's job. He's only as good as his information. His information's no good, well, he doesn't succeed.
So you had to give evidence. Brian Murphy organised a meeting with Williams. He wanted to tell him that his life was in danger and that he was likely to be killed by corrupt New South Wales coppers at his very own home. And after Drury, Williams was on the loose, and correct me if I'm wrong, you warned him that he was going to get murdered at home.
Yeah, there were coppers from Sydney come down And I didn't trust any of those. About 4 of them came. All nice chaps, but they were rats and they were working for Roger. And so we met him down the Continental, next door to the Continental Hotel in the corner of Russell and Lonsdale. There was a Chinese gambling place, quite local, and so we met him there. And he said, "Mate, what's the trouble? What's the trouble?" I said, "I think I owe you this." I said, "They're sending a team of blokes down from Sydney to knock you." He said, "Oh, fuck." He said, "What'll I do?" I said, "That's up to you." I said, "I can't hide you." I said, "You do what you want to." He said, "Can I go and tell my missus?" So he went over to a green phone that they used to hang on the wall. I heard him say to his wife, "Take what you know you've got to take and get out of the house. The coppers from Sydney are coming down to knock me."
But the gunmen weren't Sydney police. It was actually organised by another Melbourne drug dealer.
Well, I immediately became more paranoid and decided not to go home. I was looking for Linda to get in touch with Linda.
That's your missus?
Yeah.
Williams took the advice and didn't go home.
And I completely forgot that Lindsay was coming to the house that day.
But he forgot to tell his brother-in-law, Lindsay Simpson, who turned up at the house and was mistaken for the drug dealer, Alan Williams.
Alan Williams rings me. He says, "Somebody just shot my brother-in-law dead. I don't know what I'm going to fucking do."
In September 1984, 32-year-old Lindsay Simpson was shot in the back of the head as he arrived with his wife and baby daughter at the Lower Plenty home of his brother-in-law, Alan Williams. The court was told Williams, a drug dealer, was the intended victim. Pollitt had been hired to kill him for $10,000, and despite pleas from Simpson that he'd got the wrong man, he didn't back off. Simpson was not a criminal, was perfectly innocent, and Pollitt had no reason to shoot him as he didn't even know him.
Lindsay was a college that you were saying, a square, just a good bloke.
Yeah. Family man. You know, it took him 8 years to have a baby with his wife. 6 years of constant fucking hospital appointments, doctor's appointments and everything. Finally has a kid. No sooner as it's had his first fucking birthday, he's dead.
I think of the bloke who did it, what's his name?
Pollitt, little weasel.
Ray, the Red Rat Pollitt, was an armed robber and gunman.
I don't know whether Pollitt ever got paid or anything.
$5,000, I think it was, in counterfeit notes as a deposit. And because he got the wrong bloke, he didn't get the rest. So it wasn't the smartest job. So Williams, because he knew he was going to get killed, ended up making a statement about the bribery, trying to bribe Drury via Roger, and he was found guilty. Roger Rogerson was acquitted, even though he was involved. Rogerson was never found guilty over the attempted bribe or the attempted murder.
It was the law that won the court case for Rogerson. The law worked to his advantages through the double jeopardy rule. A lot of the evidence that was led couldn't be admissible a second time.
Even though Williams tried to kill Drury, they were now on the same side. Drury wanted to lift the lid on corruption. Williams just wanted to stay alive.
This is where the two of us, Drury and myself, couldn't amalgamate our evidence against Roger. The copper that gave evidence in Drury's favour swung the other way because of the fucking mental pressure that he was getting from the pub. You know, Roger was a powerful figure in the police department, highly decorated, the most highly decorated policeman in New South Wales. So you can imagine the power that he wielded in New South Wales. What has happened is, not so much in Victoria, but in New South Wales, history has shown that the police department has been, by and large, the most corrupt police department in Australia's history. The thing is, in Sydney, The line had been crossed by the police department long before I come on the scene.
Murphy knew how Sydney worked, and at one stage he thought he could be killed by bent New South Wales cops.
I was sold out by the police in New South Wales and they got 50 grand each to go against my evidence.
Murphy didn't know Mick Drury, but they finally caught up inside a Sydney court.
Then they took us up to Sydney. They flew us up to Sydney.
They were both at the trial for the attempted bribery.
I said, it was during the afternoon, I said, I'll leave us here and we'll be right. But we knew we had to go and see a Mr. Dyatt, who was the prosecutor. And then we went down to Central and we spoke to the prosecutor, a big commanding fellow he was, and he said, I'd like you to go through your evidence with me. I said, I don't know you. And he said, the prosecutor said, those pair of bastards will somersault us tomorrow and they will not give this evidence.
The prosecutors were concerned Rogerson could reach out to some of the police who were about to give evidence against him.
But we gave the evidence. And when we finished giving the evidence, I went and sat down, and this bloke grabbed me by the knee, nice and gently. I said, mate, get your hands off my knee or I'll smash you right in the fucking eye. But it wasn't, it was the policeman that had been shot.
It was Mick?
Mick, yeah. I'd never seen him. I wouldn't have known what he looked like. And he said, Brian, I'm Mick Drury. I said, really? How do you do? He said, you know, you're the only two coppers that are sticking up for me. The rest want me gone. I said, I don't know who you are, but I don't like what they did. So the court was adjourned.
Alan Williams was at the trial too, and Brian Murphy had an interesting run-in with him there.
Alan Williams was standing there, and I said something to him. He said, what did you say? I said, come over and I'll whisper it to you. So when he comes over to me, and I went to whisper in his ear, I tried to grab him by the head and bite his nose off.
It became clear in court that their once cosy relationship had turned bad.
And the magistrate come back in and he said, gentlemen, what's going on here? I said, I'm just trying to whisper something to Mr. Williams. He said, well, do your whispering outside. So we went out in the corridor. He said, you can't, you're a fucking dog, and all this kind of stuff, all the pleasantries you'd expect him to use.
Alan Williams thought Murphy and Rogerson were working together, but he was wrong.
And they're both in the same fucking intelligence bracket. You know, you never underestimate Brian Murphy, he's smart to whip. Roger's fucking smarter. So they'd be in cahoots in some form. You know what I mean?
Williams suspected Rogerson and Murphy of working together, but the cops with the colourful reputations had never met.
Well, there's the difference.
Yeah.
Well, you met Roger. What do you think of him?
No, I never met him.
Is that right?
Never. One day, on one occasion, I'm in Tasmania, waiting in the queue to get on the boat to come back to Victoria. I get a phone call, and this fella say, "G'day, champ, how are you?" I said, "Not too bad." And he said, "I got somebody who wants to talk to you." Roger the Lodger come on the phone. "Murph, where are you?" I said, "Why?" He said, "I want to catch up with you. I want to talk to you about something." Oh, I said, "What a bastard." I said, "I'm down in Soweto to a wedding." I said, "And I'm just about to go to the turnout." He says, "Oh," he said, "I wish I could get hold of you." He said, "It's something reasonably important." I said, "Well, either you stay in Melbourne," or he said, "No, I've got to get back to Sydney." My wife said to me, "Why do you tell people lies?" I said, "To survive." I ran into one of the coppers somewhere, and he said to me, "What are you telling people you're down in Sorrento when you're actually down in Tasmania?" I said, "You'll never know."
Smart move.
Oh, well, survival.
Years later, when Alan Williams was diagnosed with a fatal blood disease, he decided that his final act on earth would be to kill Brian Murphy. Williams couldn't get to Roger Rogerson, so he decided to kill Murphy because he believed, wrongly, that the two cops were working together. I was tipped off about this and did the only thing I could. I rang Brian and asked him to watch his back.
I remember being told by a very prominent journalist that Alan Williams was running around going to various places saying he's going to kill me.
And who was that journalist?
John Silvester.
So I told you that he was.
That's right.
He'd got a gun by then, I think.
I had a gun because it was about the time the Shrek came out, the film Shrek, and I'd taken 4 of my grandkids up to the Carlton Gardens to the theatre to see that. And I came back to the coffee shop in Victoria Street. What's the name of it again?
Don Camillo's?
Don Camillo's. And the owner of Don Camillo's said to me, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What are you talking about? What am I doing here?" I said, "I brought the kids in for a plate of chips and some garlic bread." And he said, "Mate, just sit there." He said, "Alan Williams has been in here. He's got a gun. And he's asking everybody where you are because he wants to kill you." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." I said, "All right then." So I took my eldest grandchild, it was a girl, and I took her out the back of Don Camillo's and I said, "Now, I'm opening this gate, and if a man comes in calling out stupid things, you grab your brothers and take them out there, get a taxi down to Nan's place, and I'll meet you later." And said, "Right up, Pop." Well, the chips and the garlic bread come expeditiously to the table. He couldn't get us out of the place quick enough. But he was frightened that somebody's going to get shot in his face. And I went back, and a couple of people in Albert Park rang, and they said that a bloke had been in there with a gun and he wanted to know where Brian Murphy was. So I got in my car and I went up looking for him, but I couldn't find him. Then I got a phone call from John Silvester again to say that he'd been admitted to hospital. I think that was on the Thursday of that week. And then on the Friday I got another phone call from the same man saying that he passed away.
William spoke to me after he was released from Goulburn Prison in 1992. He said he wanted to make a fresh start. Sadly, he didn't make it. It was only years later I understood why he agreed to talk. He was sending a message to the Underworld that he had only given evidence against a corrupt detective, Roger Rogerson, that he'd not informed on them and he should be left alone.
In other words, what you're saying is that you're not a police informant.
Exactly.
William spent a great deal of time trying to justify his actions, but eventually there was a spark of remorse, and he quietly said that he'd written to Mick Drury and apologised for what he did. No hard feelings, eh?
I wrote him a letter, a 4-page letter, writing out the facts, apologies to him and his family, explaining that I couldn't turn back the clock, that I was deeply sorry for the hurt that I caused him and his family. I can understand you would be bitter to the day you died against me, but I just hope that by me turning the corner, that it may give you some indication within the police force of New South Wales that you are a clean fella, that you stuck to your guns, and that you couldn't be bought, and that was about it for me.
Alan Williams died in 2001, days after he failed in his bid to kill Brian Murphy. Brian Murphy is long retired and spends his days building furniture for his grandchildren. Flannery, Williams and Rogerson all made the mistake of believing they were untouchable. The plan to kill Drury destroyed them all. Williams died a miserable death. Flannery was knocked and his body never found. Rogerson was rumoured to have driven him to the ambush, and Roger is likely to die in jail. The moment Flannery pulled the trigger outside Drury's family home, he detonated an explosion that would destroy the corrupt empire run by bent New South Wales police. Naked City is brought to you by The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Subscriptions power our newsroom, so to support independent journalism, consider subscribing to the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. This episode is produced and edited by Anu the Axe Hasbold, Margaret Machine Gun Gordon, and mixed and mastered by Jellic Knight John Greenfield. with technical assistance from Cool Hand Cormac Lally. Tom McHendrick is head of audio. Archival is thanks to 9 and 3AW. I'm John Silvester. Thanks for listening. Next episode is capturing Australia's #1 fugitive, Russell the Fox Cox.
I run foolishly right across in front of the car. Anyway, we blow the windscreen out and pepper the car, and he ducks down and you can still see he was holding a revolver in his hand quite clearly. Because when these things are happening, it seems like slow motion and you're very much alert to what's going on.